Commander Zethkal of the Valtharian Imperial Navy had never encountered anything quite like the human vessel that now hung motionless in the void before his flagship. The sleek, predatory design defied conventional military architecture, its dark hull seeming to absorb the starlight around it rather than reflect it. Where Valtharian ships boasted elegant curves and crystalline energy cores that pulsed with bioluminescent beauty, this human craft appeared crude, angular, and utterly utilitarian. "Scanning complete, Commander," reported his tactical officer, Lieutenant Vexai, her voice carrying the melodic undertones typical of their species. The vessel appears to be a destroyer-class warship, approximately 300 meters in length. Hull composition is predominantly refined metallic alloys with ceramic plating. No obvious weapon systems visible from this angle. Zethkal's four eyes focused independently on different aspects of the tactical display, an evolutionary advantage that had served the Valtharian race well throughout their expansion across 17 star systems. His species had encountered dozens of alien races during their centuries of exploration and conquest, and most had either submitted peacefully to Valtharian rule or been systematically eliminated. These humans, however, represented something new. "Communications, open a channel," he commanded, his voice carrying the natural authority of someone born to the noble caste. "Let us see what manner of beings crew this primitive vessel." The main view screen flickered to life, revealing the interior of what appeared to be the human ship's bridge. Zethkal had to suppress a small start of surprise. The creature that faced him looked remarkably similar to a Valtharian in basic body structure. Bipedal, roughly 2 meters tall, with a central head containing what appeared to be sensory organs. But where Valtharians possessed smooth, pearl-like skin that shifted through subtle color changes based on emotion and health, this human skin was a dull pinkish brown, stretched tight over what looked like densely packed muscle and bone. "I am Captain Sarah Chen of the UES Retribution," the human said, her voice carrying none of the musical quality that marked civilized speech among the known species. Instead, it was harsh, direct, and strangely compelling. "You've been broadcasting demands for our surrender for the past 6 hours. I thought it was time we had a proper conversation." Zethkal allowed his skin to shift to a pattern indicating diplomatic courtesy, though he doubted the alien would recognize the gesture. "I am Commander Zethkal of the Valtharian Third Fleet. Your vessel has entered restricted space claimed by the Valtharian Empire. By imperial decree, you must submit to inspection and interrogation regarding your species' capabilities and intentions." The human's face underwent a curious transformation, the corners of her mouth turning upward in what his xenobiology briefings suggested might be expression of amusement. "Restricted space? Interesting. Our star charts show this system as unclaimed territory, well outside any recognized borders." "Your charts are incorrect," Zethkal replied smoothly. "The Valtharian Empire has held dominion over this region for the past 40 standard years. We encountered no resistance during our expansion, suggesting the absence of any technologically advanced species with legitimate territorial claims." Captain Chen leaned back in her command chair, and Zethkal noticed that the other humans visible on the bridge shared certain characteristics. They all appeared to be built with the same dense musculature, the same alert, predatory bearing. More disturbing still, they seemed utterly unintimidated by the sight of his massive flagship, despite being outnumbered 50-1. "Commander Zethkal," Chen said, pronouncing his name with surprising accuracy, "I'm going to share something with you that might change your perspective on this situation. We've been monitoring your fleet's communications for the past week. Your technology is impressive. Those quantum entanglement communicators are particularly elegant. But here's what troubles me. In all your discussions about how to handle the primitive human vessel, not once have you considered that we might have been allowing you to monitor us." The implications of her words sent a chill through Zethkal's nervous system, causing his skin to shift involuntarily to patterns indicating concern. "Impossible. Our encryption protocols are based on 12-dimensional quantum matrices with rotating cipher keys that change every 3.7 seconds. Chen interrupted. "Very sophisticated. It took our AI systems almost 4 minutes to crack when we first encountered your species 6 months ago. 6 months ago." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. If these humans had been observing Veiltharian forces for 6 months without being detected, it suggested a level of technological sophistication that fundamentally challenged everything the Empire believed about their own superiority. "You're lying," Zethkal said. But even as the words left his vocal apparatus, he knew they sounded hollow. His tactical displays were already beginning to show anomalous readings as his sensor operators frantically recalibrated their equipment. "Commander, we're detecting massive gravitational distortions throughout the system," Lieutenant Vexes reported, her voice tight with barely controlled fear. At least 200 contacts, possibly more. They're decloaking." The main view screen split into multiple feeds as Zethkal's communications officer began routing sensor data from across his fleet. What he saw defied everything he thought he knew about warfare, strategy, and the fundamental nature of space combat. Human vessels were materializing out of empty space, not emerging from hyperspace or dropping stealth fields, but literally seeming to phase into existence from dimensions his sensors couldn't even detect. They came in dozens of different configurations. Sleek destroyers like the Retribution, massive dreadnoughts bristling with weapon systems that hurt to look at, carrier vessels disgorging clouds of smaller craft that moved with impossible coordination, but most disturbing of all were the ships that seemed to defy physics entirely. Vessels that folded space around themselves, craft that existed in multiple locations simultaneously, and one massive construct that appeared to be built around a contained singularity. "My apologies for the dramatic reveal," Captain Chen said, her voice cutting through the chaos of alarm signals and panicked communications from across the Veiltharian fleet. "But we found that most species respond better to visual demonstrations than abstract explanations of human military capabilities." Zethkal's mind raced through tactical possibilities, but every scenario ended in the complete annihilation of his forces. His fleet represented the finest military technology the Veiltharian Empire could produce. Ships that had conquered star systems, weapons that could crack planets, shields that had never been breached by any known force. Yet he was beginning to understand that he was facing something entirely beyond his experience. "What do you want?" he asked, the words tasting of defeat in his mouth. "What we want," Chen replied, "is for you to carry a message back to your empire. Humanity has been watching the Veiltharian expansion for quite some time now. We've observed your methods of conquest, your treatment of subjugated species, your military doctrine. We find ourselves unimpressed. We have conquered 17 star systems," Zethkal protested. "Our military might is unquestioned throughout this region of space. No species has ever successfully resisted Veiltharian expansion." "No," Chen agreed, "they haven't. Do you know why? Because every species you've encountered has been peaceful. Explorers, traders, scientists, philosophers. You've been bullying children, Commander, and mistaking their unwillingness to fight back for weakness." The human stood from her command chair, and for the first time Zethkal noticed that she wore no visible weapons, no obvious protective equipment, just a simple uniform that seemed designed more for comfort than combat. Yet something in her posture, in the way she moved, suggested violence held in careful restraint. "Let me tell you something about humanity, Commander. We didn't become the dominant species on our world through superior technology or natural advantages. We became apex predators through one simple trait. We never stop fighting. Every challenge makes us stronger. Every defeat teaches us new ways to win. Every victory shows us new heights to reach." Around the Retribution, the massive human fleet held position with disciplined precision. Zethkal's sensors were finally beginning to penetrate some of their stealth systems, and what they revealed made his blood run cold. The human vessels weren't just armed, they were weapons platforms, built around exotic physics that shouldn't have been possible. Antimatter containment systems that used controlled black holes as power sources. Kinetic weapons that accelerated projectiles to significant fractions of light speed. Energy weapons that seemed to tap directly into zero-point fluctuations in space-time itself. "Our species has been at war for over 90% of our recorded history," Chen continued. "We've fought each other, our environment, extinction events, resource scarcity, ideological differences, and territorial disputes. We've perfected warfare in ways your peaceful civilizations never had to imagine. And now, we've turned those skills toward the stars. If you possess such overwhelming force, Zethkal managed to ask, why reveal yourselves now? Why not simply destroy us? Because, Chen said, and for the first time her expression softened slightly. Despite what you might think, humans aren't monsters. We prefer diplomacy when possible. But we also believe in protecting those who cannot protect themselves. The Yethmori colony you destroyed last month? They were artists, Commander. Poets and musicians and dreamers who never raised a weapon against anyone. The Keflan research station you obliterated? They were working on medical techniques that could have saved millions of lives. The weight of her words settled over Zethkal like a crushing gravitational field. The Veiltharian Empire's expansion had indeed been methodical and thorough, but he had never considered the perspective of their victims. In his mind, they had been bringing order and civilization to chaotic, primitive regions of space. The idea that they might be seen as destroyers rather than liberators had never occurred to him. Here's what's going to happen, Chen said, her voice returning to its earlier businesslike tone. You're going to return to Veiltharian space. You're going to report to your Admiralty that humanity exists, that we're technologically superior to anything in your arsenal, and that we're taking a very personal interest in your Empire's future expansion plans. And if we refuse to abandon our territorial claims? Zethkal asked, though he already knew the answer. Then you'll discover why every species that has ever encountered humans in a combat situation has either joined us as allies or been removed as threats, Chen replied. The choice, as always, is yours. The transmission ended, leaving Zethkal staring at a blank screen while his officers awaited orders. Around his fleet, the human vessels maintained their positions, a silent, overwhelming reminder of the new reality he now faced. For the first time in his military career, Commander Zethkal of the Veiltharian Imperial Navy understood what it meant to be truly outmatched. As he gave the order to withdraw, one thought echoed through his mind with terrifying clarity. They had not encountered just another alien species. They had found humanity. And humanity, it seemed, was everything the galaxy's nightmares were made of. The Veiltharian High Council chamber had never witnessed such chaos. Ancient protocols that had governed imperial decision-making for centuries crumbled under the weight of Commander Zethkal's report. Admiral Kethvis, Supreme Commander of the Imperial Fleet, stood at the center of the crystalline amphitheater, his skin cycling through colors that indicated profound distress and disbelief. You expect us to believe, High Counselor Vithara said, her voice carrying the harmonic authority of someone who had ruled star systems for over 2 centuries, that a single primitive vessel and its accompanying fleet somehow neutralized our most advanced battle group without firing a shot? Zethkal's tactical recordings played on the chamber's holographic display, showing the impossible emergence of the human fleet from what appeared to be empty space. The assembled nobles and military commanders watched in stunned silence as ship after ship materialized, each one representing technology that challenged their understanding of physics itself. The evidence is undeniable, Admiral Kethvis admitted, though his skin patterns showed how much the admission cost him. Our best scientists have analyzed these recordings for 3 standard days. The energy signatures are unlike anything in our database. These humans appear to have mastered technologies we considered theoretical impossibilities. High Counselor Nimthor, eldest among the assembled rulers, raised one of his 4 arms to command attention. In my 400 years of service to the Empire, we have encountered 53 distinct alien species. Each one eventually yielded to Veiltharian superiority. These humans cannot be fundamentally different. With respect, Counselor, Zethkal interjected, immediately regretting his boldness as dozens of eyes turned toward him. They are different. I've studied the recordings of their captain's words dozens of times. She spoke of humanity's history with a casual acceptance of violence that was disturbing. They don't see warfare as a regrettable necessity or a tool of last resort. They see it as a natural state of existence. The chamber's atmospheric processors hummed quietly as the assembled leaders processed this information. The Veiltharian Empire had built its dominance on the assumption that most species, when faced with overwhelming technological superiority, would choose submission over extinction. It was a logical response. one that had served them well throughout their expansion. Perhaps, suggested Admiral Yethkol, commander of the Second Fleet, we should consider alternative approaches. If these humans possess such advanced technology, an alliance might prove beneficial. We could offer them tributary status within the Empire, sharing technology and resources. The suggestion drew murmurs of approval from several council members, but Zethkal found himself shaking his head. I don't believe that's an option, Admiral. Captain Chen made it very clear that humanity has been observing our expansion for months. She knew details about our military operations that should have been impossible to obtain. More importantly, she spoke of our actions as if we were criminals rather than conquerors. High Counselor Vithara's skin shifted to patterns indicating deep thought. Elaborate on this assessment, Commander. The humans view our expansion as unprovoked aggression against innocent species, Zethkal explained. They specifically mentioned the Yethmori colony and the Kethlan research station. From their perspective, we haven't been bringing civilization to primitive worlds. We've been committing systematic genocide. The chamber fell silent. The concept of viewing Valtharian expansion as anything other than a civilizing force was so alien to their worldview that many of the council members struggled to process it. They had always seen themselves as benevolent rulers, bringing order and progress to chaotic regions of space. Impossible, High Counselor Nimthor declared. We offer subjugated species protection, technology, and integration into the greatest civilization this galaxy has ever known. How could any rational being view this as aggression? Because, a new voice said from the chamber's main entrance, you never bothered to ask if they wanted any of those things. Every head in the chamber turned toward the unexpected speaker. Standing in the doorway, somehow having bypassed the most sophisticated security systems in Valtharian space, was a human. She appeared to be the same species as Captain Chen, but was clearly a different individual, taller, with darker skin and hair that seemed to absorb light. She wore no protective equipment, carried no visible weapons, yet her presence filled the chamber with an almost palpable sense of danger. I am Ambassador Elena Vasquez of the United Earth Coalition, the human said, walking calmly down the central aisle as hundreds of guards materialized around the chamber's perimeter. I come bearing an official diplomatic communication from the Human Congressional Assembly. Admiral Kethvis gestured sharply, and 50 energy weapons focused on the human intruder. How did you penetrate our security? How did you even reach this system undetected? Ambassador Vasquez smiled, an expression that somehow managed to be both friendly and terrifying. The same way we've been monitoring your empire for the past 6 months, Admiral. You've built very impressive defenses against threats you understand. Unfortunately for you, humanity has a talent for approaching problems from directions no one else considers. She reached slowly into a pouch at her waist, withdrawing what appeared to be a simple crystalline data storage device. This contains a complete record of every military action the Valtharian Empire has taken during your expansion, detailed analysis of your tactics, casualty reports from your conquests, and testimony from survivors of species you believed you had completely eliminated. High Counselor Vithara's skin had shifted to patterns indicating profound unease. Survivors, impossible. Our extermination protocols are thorough and complete. Your protocols are adequate for dealing with species that lack the resources for evacuation and relocation, Vasquez agreed. But you've been operating under the assumption that you are the only technologically advanced civilization in this region. We've been quietly relocating refugee populations from your conquest zones for months. The Yethmori artists you believe dead? They're currently establishing a new colony in human space. The Kethlan medical researchers? They're working with our xenobiology teams to develop treatments for diseases you've been using as biological weapons. The implications of her words sent ripples of shock through the assembled council. If the humans had been systematically evacuating populations ahead of Valtharian expansion, it meant they had been operating with detailed knowledge of imperial military plans. More disturbing still, it suggested a level of humanitarian concern that was completely foreign to Valtharian thinking. What does humanity want? High Counselor Nimthor asked, his ancient voice carrying undertones of resignation. What we want, Vasquez replied, is for the Valtharian Empire to cease all expansion activities immediately and permanently. You will withdraw your forces to your pre-expansion borders and begin negotiating reparations for the species you've displaced or destroyed. The chamber erupted in protests and denials. The idea of surrendering conquered territory was so fundamentally opposed to Valtharian nature that many council members seemed unable to process the demand. "And if we refuse?" Admiral Kethvis demanded. Vasquez's expression didn't change, but something in her posture shifted subtly. Suddenly, every Valtharian in the chamber was acutely aware that they were in the presence of a predator. "Then humanity will demonstrate why we've never lost a war in our species' history." "Preposterous," High Counselor Vythara said, though her skin patterns betrayed her growing fear. "No species has an unblemished military record. Conflict is inevitable, and defeat teaches essential lessons." "You're absolutely correct," Vasquez agreed. "Defeat does teach essential lessons. Humanity learned those lessons fighting each other for thousands of years before we ever left our home world. We learned them fighting extinction events, hostile environments, and resource scarcity. By the time we developed space travel, we had already perfected warfare in ways your peaceful expansion never required you to understand." She gestured toward the chamber's holographic displays, and somehow, impossibly, the Valtharian security systems responded to her commands. Images began appearing in the air above the assembled council. Battlefields from human history, spanning millennia of increasingly sophisticated and devastating conflicts. "This is the Battle of Stalingrad," Vasquez said as images of brutal urban warfare filled the display. Humans fought for 206 days over control of a single city, accepting casualty rates that would have caused any rational species to surrender after the first week. "This is the Siege of Leningrad, where humans ate leather and wallpaper paste rather than submit to conquest." More images followed. Nuclear weapons detonated in anger, chemical warfare that poisoned entire landscapes, biological weapons that turned human immune systems against themselves. The assembled Valtharians watched in horrified fascination as humanity's capacity for self-destruction was laid bare before them. "We did this to ourselves," Vasquez continued, her voice carrying no pride, only a grim acceptance of historical reality. "For resources, for ideology, for territory, for reasons so trivial that our historians still struggle to understand them. And every single conflict taught us new ways to kill, new strategies for victory, new methods for turning our enemies' strengths against them." The displays shifted to show more recent conflicts, space battles between human factions fought with weapons that bent reality itself, planetary bombardments that cracked tectonic plates, war crimes on such a massive scale that they defied comprehension. "The Terran Civil War lasted 37 years, Vasquez said. "We fought with antimatter weapons, engineered plagues, and gravitational distortion fields that turned entire star systems into weapons. When it ended, we had learned to wage war on scales your species has never imagined. More importantly, we had learned why such conflicts must never be allowed to happen again." High Counselor Nimthor's skin had shifted to patterns indicating deep philosophical contemplation. "You're suggesting that humanity's capacity for violence makes you natural peacekeepers? I'm suggesting that humanity's understanding of violence makes us uniquely qualified to recognize and prevent unnecessary suffering," Vasquez replied. "When we encountered the first refugee ships from your expansion, we didn't see primitive aliens fleeing superior forces. We saw civilians being targeted by military forces for the crime of existing in territory someone else wanted. We've done that to each other enough times to recognize it immediately." Admiral Kethvis stepped forward, his skin patterns cycling through combinations indicating both confusion and growing understanding. "You could have simply destroyed our fleets. Your technological superiority is undeniable. Why offer us this choice?" "Because," Vasquez said, "despite what your actions suggest, we don't believe the Valtharian people are fundamentally evil. You've created a military doctrine based on the assumption that might makes right and conquest equals civilization. These are mistakes humanity made thousands of years ago. We learned better. Now we're offering you the same opportunity." She gestured again, and the holographic displays shifted to show images of thriving worlds. Yethmori artists creating beautiful sculptures in human space, Kethlon researchers working alongside human scientists, dozens of species cooperating on projects that benefited everyone involved. This is what the galaxy looks like when species choose cooperation over conquest, Vasquez said. We're offering the Valtharian Empire the chance to join this community as equals. But make no mistake, this is the only offer you'll receive. Refuse, and you'll discover that humanity's capacity for destruction exceeds even our capacity for creation. The chamber fell silent as the assembled leaders contemplated their options. For the first time in Valtharian history, they faced a choice between submission and annihilation. The irony was not lost on Zethkal, who had delivered similar ultimatums to dozens of species during his military career. As the council prepared to deliberate, Ambassador Vasquez offered one final observation that would haunt their discussions for days to come. The greatest tragedy of war, counselors, is not that the strong destroy the weak. It's that the weak are destroyed before they ever get the chance to become strong. Humanity is offering the Valtharian Empire that chance. Use it wisely. 3 months had passed since Ambassador Vasquez delivered humanity's ultimatum to the Valtharian High Council, and the Empire teetered on the edge of civil war. Commander Zethkal found himself standing on the observation deck of the orbital platform above Valthara Prime, watching as massive human vessels maintained their positions throughout the system. They had arrived 2 weeks ago, not as conquerors, but as observers, waiting to see what choice the Empire would make. The political situation had become impossibly complex. Traditionalist factions led by High Counselor Nimthor demanded that the Empire fight rather than submit to alien ultimatums. Progressive voices, growing stronger each day, argued that cooperation with humanity represented the Empire's best hope for survival. Military leaders found themselves divided between duty to their oaths and growing recognition that conventional warfare against humanity would be tantamount to suicide. "Commander Zethkal," came a voice from behind him. He turned to see Admiral Kethvis approaching, his skin patterns indicating deep weariness and internal conflict. "The High Council has requested your presence at today's session. They want your assessment of human military capabilities." Zethkal followed the Admiral through the platform's crystalline corridors, past bustling chambers where bureaucrats and military officers attempted to maintain normal operations despite the crisis engulfing their civilization. As they walked, Kethvis spoke in low tones about the intelligence reports that had been flooding in from across the Empire. "Our long-range sensors have detected human vessels in 17 different systems," the Admiral said. "Not invasion forces, observation posts. They're watching every major installation we have, monitoring our communications, tracking our fleet movements. It's as if they've turned our entire territory into a laboratory for studying our behavior." "Have they interfered with any operations?" Zethkal asked. "That's what makes this so unnerving," Kethvis replied. "They're not interfering with anything. Trade continues, colonial administration proceeds normally. Even our military exercises continue on schedule. They're simply watching, waiting for us to make our choice." They entered the High Council chamber to find it in chaos. Representatives from across the Empire had gathered for what many believed would be the most crucial political session in Valtharian history. The debate had been raging for hours, with no clear consensus emerging about how to respond to humanity's demands. "The humans have given us an impossible choice," High Counselor Vithora was saying as they took their seats. "Abandon everything our civilization has built, retreat to our historical borders, and beg forgiveness from species we conquered centuries ago. How can we possibly accept such terms?" "Because the alternative is extinction," responded Counselor Mishfar, one of the most prominent progressive voices. "Our own intelligence confirms that human technology surpasses ours in every meaningful category. Their vessels can manipulate space-time itself. Their weapons tap into exotic physics we barely understand, and their tactical capabilities suggest military experience on scales we've never imagined." High Counselor Nimthor rose from his ancient seat, his 400-year-old voice still carrying the authority that had shaped imperial policy for decades. "In all my years of service, I have never witnessed such cowardice from Valtharian leadership. We are being asked to surrender our birthright to creatures who crawled out of a single star system. Our ancestors conquered the void itself to build this empire. Would you have us abandon their legacy out of fear? Our ancestors, Counselor Meshvar replied, built their empire by conquering species that possessed no meaningful military capabilities. They were explorers, traders, and philosophers who valued peace over warfare. We're facing something entirely different now. A species that has perfected the art of war through necessity, not choice. The debate continued for hours, cycling through the same arguments and counter-arguments that had paralyzed Imperial decision-making for months. As Zethkal listened, he found his own thoughts drifting to his encounter with Captain Chen and the memories of that day when his understanding of the universe had been fundamentally altered. A soft chime indicated an incoming priority communication, and the chamber's main display activated to show Ambassador Vasquez's face. Her appearance silenced the debating counselors immediately. "Honorable members of the Veiltharian High Council," she said, her voice carrying across the chamber with crisp clarity. "I hope you'll forgive this interruption, but recent developments require immediate attention." High Counselor Vithara activated her response system. "Ambassador, this is a closed session of the Imperial Government. Your presence was not requested." Unfortunately, Vasquez replied, "Events don't always wait for convenient timing. 3 hours ago, a Veiltharian battle group under the command of Admiral Yethkol launched an attack against human observation posts in the Kepler 442 system. I assume this was not an action authorized by the High Council?" The chamber erupted in shocked exclamations and demands for information. Admiral Kethvis was already accessing military communication networks, his skin patterns shifting to colors indicating extreme agitation. Admiral Yethkol was ordered to maintain defensive positions only, Kethvis reported. He had no authorization to engage human forces. Unfortunately, Ambassador Vasquez continued, authorization or lack thereof doesn't change the reality of what occurred. 12 Veiltharian vessels opened fire on our observation post, with full military weapons. Our defensive systems were forced to respond. Forced to respond, High Counselor Nimthor demanded. Are you claiming self-defense while occupying sovereign Veiltharian territory? Vasquez's expression didn't change, but something in her eyes suggested profound sadness. Counselor, I'm not claiming anything. I'm informing you of the results of Admiral Yethkol's attack. His battle group no longer exists. All hands were lost when their vessel's quantum containment system suffered cascading failures after contact with our defensive grid. The chamber fell silent. 12 ships carrying nearly 15,000 Veiltharian military personnel eliminated in what amounted to a skirmish. The technological disparity between the two species was even greater than their worst estimates had suggested. However, Vasquez continued, I want to emphasize that humanity deeply regrets this loss of life. Admiral Yethkol and his crews were following orders they believed to be legitimate. Their deaths serve no one's interests. Admiral Kethvis had been receiving constant updates through his neural interface, and his skin patterns now displayed combinations that indicated both grief and terror. Our tactical analysis of the engagement shows, Ambassador, your defensive systems destroyed 12 heavy cruisers without sustaining any apparent damage. How is that possible? Admiral, Vasquez replied, when humanity developed interstellar warfare capabilities, we did so with the understanding that space combat would be fundamentally different from anything we had experienced on our homeworld. We built our defenses assuming we would face opponents with access to antimatter weapons, relativistic projectiles, and exotic physics applications. Your Admiral's attack was well coordinated and professionally executed, but it was based on tactical assumptions that haven't been relevant to human military thinking for over a century. Counselor Meshvar leaned forward in his seat. Ambassador, what does this incident mean for the negotiation process? Will humanity consider this an act of war? That depends, Vasquez said, on how the Veiltharian government chooses to characterize Admiral Yethkol's actions. If this was an authorized military strike against human forces, then yes, a state of war now exists between our species. If this was an unauthorized action by a rogue commander, then it was a tragic accident that both sides should work to prevent in the future. High Counselor Vithara understood immediately what the human was offering. And if we acknowledge that Admiral Yethkol acted without proper authorization, Then humanity will consider this incident a cautionary example of what happens when communication breaks down between our species, Vasquez replied. We'll work with Valtharian authorities to ensure similar misunderstandings don't occur in the future. The political calculus was brutally simple. The Empire could claim Admiral Yethkol as a hero who died defending Valtharian territory and face the full military might of humanity in response. Or they could disavow his actions, accept responsibility for the breakdown in command authority, and continue negotiations from a position of acknowledged weakness. There is another matter we need to discuss, Vasquez said before anyone could respond to her implicit offer. The attack on our observation post was not Admiral Yethkol's only action in the past week. Our intelligence networks have detected communications between hardline military factions and several extremist political groups. There appears to be a coordinated effort to sabotage any peaceful resolution to our current situation. She gestured, and the chamber's holographic displays activated to show intercepted communications, meeting recordings, and financial transaction records. The evidence painted a clear picture of conspiracy reaching into the highest levels of Valtharian society. We have documented proof of plans to assassinate Progressive Council members, stage false flag attacks on human diplomatic missions, and launch preemptive strikes against civilian targets in human space. Vasquez continued, these plans involve military resources, government funding, and coordination between multiple Imperial agencies. High Counselor Nimthor's skin had shifted to patterns indicating outrage and denial. These allegations are preposterous. The Valtharian military would never target civilian populations. Counselor, Vasquez replied, her voice carrying a note of genuine sadness. Your military has targeted civilian populations in 43 separate incidents during your expansion. We have recordings of the orders, tactical assessments of the attacks, and testimony from survivors. The difference is that in previous cases, you were targeting species that lacked the ability to retaliate. The chamber's atmosphere processors worked overtime to maintain stable environmental conditions as hundreds of Valtharian officials struggled to process the implications of her words. Everything they thought they knew about their own civilization was being systematically dismantled by an alien who seemed to know more about Valtharian history than they did themselves. What do you want from us? High Counselor Vithara asked, her voice carrying the exhaustion of someone who had spent months grappling with impossible choices. What we've always wanted, Vasquez replied, an honest acknowledgement of past actions, a commitment to peaceful coexistence, and cooperation in building a better future for all species in this region of space. But recent events have made it clear that significant elements within your government are not interested in peaceful solutions. Admiral Kethvis accessed his tactical networks and began reviewing the evidence humanity had provided. What he found made his skin shift to colors indicating profound dismay. The communications are authentic, he reported. The planned attacks, the assassination plots, the false flag operations, our own security services have been monitoring some of these activities. Then you understand why humanity can no longer afford to wait for the Valtharian Empire to make a decision, Vasquez said. We're implementing immediate protective measures for all threatened parties. Progressive Council members will be placed under human protection. Civilian populations in potential target zones are being evacuated, and any Valtharian military unit that demonstrates hostile intent toward human forces or protected populations will be neutralized. The ultimatum was delivered with calm professionalism, but its implications were staggering. Humanity was effectively placing the Valtharian Empire under martial law, protecting some citizens from their own government while threatening to eliminate any military force that opposed them. This is occupation, High Counselor Nimthor declared. You're forcing your will upon a sovereign government through military intimidation. We're preventing a war that would result in the extinction of your species, Vasquez corrected. The choice remains the same as it was 3 months ago: cooperation or destruction. The only difference is that recent events have made it clear we can't trust your government to control its own extremist elements. As the session continued into the night, Commander Zethkal found himself reflecting on the conversation he'd had with Captain Chen months earlier. She had warned him that humanity never stopped fighting, that every challenge made them stronger. Now he was witnessing the logical result of that philosophy. A species so thoroughly adapted to conflict that they could wage war and peace simultaneously, protecting their enemies from themselves while preparing for any possible outcome. 6 months after humanity's ultimatum, Commander Zethkal stood in what had once been the war room of the Valtharian Imperial Navy. The massive strategic displays that had once tracked conquest and expansion now showed something entirely different. A complex web of refugee resettlement operations, humanitarian missions, and reconstruction efforts, spanning dozens of star systems. The transformation had not been smooth. Extremist factions within the Empire had attempted 3 separate coups, launched 17 terrorist attacks against progressive leaders, and tried to incite open rebellion in 7 colonial systems. Each attempt had been quietly and efficiently neutralized by human intervention forces who seemed to appear wherever they were needed, precisely when they were needed. "Commander?" called Admiral Kethvis from across the room. "The final evacuation transports have departed from Kethland 7. The medical research teams report they've successfully relocated all critical personnel and equipment to the new facility." Zethkal nodded, checking another item off the seemingly endless list of tasks required to transform an empire built on conquest into something resembling a civilized society. The Kethland researchers, who had been presumed dead for over a year, were now working with human xenobiology teams to develop medical treatments for species across the galaxy. Their expertise, combined with human technology, was producing breakthrough therapies at an unprecedented rate. "Any word from the Yethmori Cultural Exchange Program?" he asked. "The first group of Valtharian artists arrived at the colony yesterday." Admiral Kethvis replied. "Initial reports suggest the collaboration is proceeding better than expected. Apparently, Yethmori sculpture techniques combined with Valtharian crystal growing methods are producing results that neither species had imagined possible. It was a pattern that had repeated itself across dozens of worlds as humanity facilitated contact between species the Empire had conquered or displaced. Rather than simply forcing reparations or territorial concessions, the humans had engineered a complex network of cultural, scientific, and economic exchanges that benefited everyone involved. The chamber's main entrance chimed, and Ambassador Vasquez entered, carrying what appeared to be a stack of traditional Valtharian documentation crystals. Over the months, she had become a familiar presence in imperial administrative centers, working with cooperative officials to restructure everything from military doctrine to colonial governance. "Gentlemen," she said, placing the crystals on the central conference table, "I have some interesting news from the outer territories. The Jektar Confederation has formally requested membership in the Galactic Cooperation Initiative." Admiral Kethvis's skin patterns shifted to show surprise. The Jektar were one of the few species in the region that had successfully resisted Valtharian expansion, maintaining their independence through superior defensive technology and strategic positioning. Their decision to join humanity's growing alliance represented a significant shift in regional politics. "What prompted their change of position?" Zethkal asked. "They've been observing the results of the reconstruction efforts in former Valtharian territory," Vasquez explained. "Refugee populations are being resettled, damaged ecosystems are being restored, and species that had been at war for generations are now working together on joint projects. From the Jektar perspective, this represents the first stable, peaceful organization this region of space has seen in centuries." She activated one of the documentation crystals, and the room's holographic displays showed images from across the former empire. Yetmari artists and Valtharian engineers working together to design buildings that incorporated both aesthetic beauty and structural innovation. Kethlan medical researchers sharing their knowledge with human doctors to develop treatments for diseases that had plagued multiple species for millennia. Former military installations being converted into research centers, cultural exchanges, and diplomatic facilities. The most remarkable development, Vasquez continued, is happening on Valthara Prime itself. Public support for the reconstruction efforts has reached 73%, with similar numbers supporting full integration into the Galactic Cooperation Initiative. Admiral Kethvis accessed his political monitoring networks, reviewing the latest polling data and social trend analyses. "The younger generations are particularly supportive," he noted. "Citizens under 50 years of age show approval ratings above 80% for cooperation with humanity and allied species." It wasn't entirely surprising. The younger Veltharians had grown up during the expansion period, but they had also been exposed to information about the species their empire had conquered. Many had experienced profound cultural shock upon learning the true nature of their civilization's growth. The opportunity to be part of something constructive rather than destructive appealed to their desire for meaning and purpose. "What about the resistance movements?" Zethkal asked. Intelligence reports continued to identify pockets of extremist activity throughout former Imperial territory, declining rapidly. Vasquez replied, "Our psychological operations teams have been working with Veltharian social scientists to develop counter-narratives for extremist propaganda. It turns out that most resistance activity was based on misinformation about human intentions and capabilities." She activated another crystal, showing detailed analyses of captured extremist communications. The documents revealed conspiracy theories, propaganda narratives, and recruitment materials that painted humanity as an existential threat to Veltharian culture and identity. The reality that humans were actively working to preserve and strengthen Veltharian society while integrating it into a larger peaceful community was fundamentally incompatible with extremist messaging. The hardline factions made a critical error in their resistance strategy, Admiral Kethvis observed. They assumed that human occupation would follow traditional conquest patterns: resource extraction, cultural suppression, and political domination. When citizens began experiencing the opposite, support for resistance collapsed. Zethkal had witnessed this transformation firsthand during his travels throughout former Imperial territory. Worlds that had been expecting military occupation instead found themselves recipients of advanced technology, medical aid, and educational resources. Colonial populations that had been bracing for cultural assimilation were instead being encouraged to preserve and share their unique traditions. "There is one matter that requires immediate attention," Vasquez said, her tone becoming more serious. "Our deep space monitoring networks have detected military activity in the Andorian sector. A species calling themselves the Hegemon Unity appears to be following an expansion pattern very similar to what the Veltharian Empire practiced." Admiral Kethvis accessed his tactical databases, pulling up what little information they had about the Andorian region. "We've had minimal contact with species in that area," he reported. "Our expansion never reached that far, and their technology seemed primitive during our initial surveys." "Apparently that's changed," Vasquez said. "Intelligence suggests the Hegemon Unity has conquered at least 6 star systems in the past year, using tactics that mirror early Veltharian military doctrine. They appear to be specifically targeting peaceful species with advanced technology but limited military capabilities." The implications were troubling. If another aggressive species was following the same expansion pattern that had made the Veltharian Empire a threat, it suggested that humanity's intervention in this region had been just the beginning of a much larger problem. "What does humanity intend to do about this situation?" Zethkal asked. Vasquez's expression became thoughtful. "That depends, Commander, on what the Veltharian people want to do about it. The Galactic Cooperation Initiative operates on principles of collective security and mutual aid. If member species identify a threat to galactic stability, we respond together." "You're suggesting that Veltharian forces could participate in military action against the Hegemon Unity?" Admiral Kethvis asked. "I'm suggesting that former Veltharian military personnel, now serving in integrated coalition forces, could help protect innocent species from conquest and displacement," Vasquez corrected. "We're not asking you to conquer new territory or impose your will on unwilling populations. We're asking if you want to help prevent other species from experiencing what the Yethmori and Kethlan went through." It was a profound psychological shift. For centuries, Veltharian military forces had been instruments of expansion and conquest. Now they were being offered the opportunity to become protectors of the weak and defenders of the innocent. Many of the same tactical skills and strategic capabilities that had made them effective conquerors could be redirected toward humanitarian purposes. "The irony is striking," Admiral Kethvis observed. "Our military expertise, developed through conquest, could now be used to prevent conquest by others." "That's not irony," Vasquez replied. "That's evolution. Humanity went through the same transformation centuries ago. We learned to redirect our capacity for violence toward protective rather than predatory purposes. It's one of the most important transitions any species can make. Over the following hours, they discussed the practical implications of Veiltharian participation in coalition military operations, technical integration between human and Veiltharian systems, tactical coordination between species with very different military traditions, and the psychological challenges of transforming conquest-oriented forces into peacekeeping units. As the day progressed, Zethkal found himself reflecting on the extraordinary transformation his species had undergone. 6 months ago, they had been the dominant military power in their region of space, feared by dozens of species and convinced of their own superiority. Now they were junior partners in an alliance dedicated to preventing the kind of suffering they themselves had inflicted on others. Commander, Ambassador Vasquez said as the meeting concluded, "I have one final question for you. Looking back at your encounter with Captain Chen, do you understand now why she said humanity was the galaxy's nightmare?" Zethkal considered the question carefully. "Because you represent the end of conquest as a viable strategy for expansion," he said finally. "Every aggressive species that encounters humanity faces the same choice we did: evolve or be destroyed. For civilizations built on military dominance, that realization is indeed nightmarish." Vasquez nodded approvingly. "But it's also liberating, isn't it? When conquest becomes impossible, cooperation becomes inevitable. When military expansion fails, cultural and scientific exchange succeeds. When fear-based relationships collapse, trust-based partnerships emerge." As Ambassador Vasquez departed to continue her work transforming galactic civilization, Commander Zethkal remained in the former war room, watching displays that now showed construction rather than destruction, cooperation rather than conquest, and hope rather than fear. The nightmare humanity represented was not the end of civilization. It was the end of barbarism masquerading as civilization. Outside the chamber's viewports, human vessels continued their patient vigil over Veilthara Prime, no longer occupiers or conquerors, but guardians of a fragile peace that was slowly spreading throughout the galaxy. They had faced the unknown in battle and discovered that humanity was indeed the nightmare of every tyrant, conqueror, and oppressor who had ever believed that might made right. For the innocent, the weak, and the displaced, however, humanity was something entirely different. They were hope made manifest, defenders of the defenseless, and architects of a future where conquest would be remembered only as a relic of a darker age. The galaxy would never be the same.